A lot of our people are out of town, but we're committed to doing a third Saturday all the way through the summer.
That's nice. Yeah.
And we finally got some open house signs.
Yeah. So do you start the tour here?
Well, actually, I started with the Adobe because it's the oldest structure on the site.
Okay.
And then we kind of weave our way through the entirety of the history. So
well,
if you'd like to do the tour,
I love
let's do
it.
this.
Yeah, it sounds good. I love it.
I usually start out with a little bit of context, a context statement.
Right.
And,
Mr. Reuben, so what's your first name?
Reuben Mendoza. Yeah.
Reuben, okay,
Yes.
your first name is Reuben Mendoza.
Yes, Mendoza.
I'm Eloise.
Eloise, nice to meet you, Eloise.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, and I wanted to start with this. This is a medallion, and the medallion, if you look at it,
Yeah.
it's in Spanish, con la triple garantía, with the triple guarantee, and those are religion, independence, and union.
Nice.
And you see the New World and the Old World in a broken chain. Then here at the bottom, basically one world in Latin. And this medallion on the other side is La Primera Época, the first epoch, and it has a crown, a Roman laurel leaf crown. And this particular medal was given by Agustín Iturbide in 1821 to the soldiers that fought the Mexican independence movement. He was himself a Spaniard in the Spanish military, and when they reached Mexico City and then they brought down the Spanish Empire, these medals he had produced in gold, silver, and of course in copper. And these were the third tier medals given to soldiers on the front lines, captains, etc. And I managed to get this from an old historian in San Juan Bautista, Arch Hayes. And Arch Hayes used to parade around at the Sloat Landing Festival in the only Mexican uniform that was available. And so he felt there had to be representation. But so for me, this represents the break between the Spanish and, of course, the emergence of the Mexican Republic, which spawned the creation of this Adobe. The coins I'm going to show you kind of represent the different periods as well. Well, for example, here we have, you can handle that.
Oh, yeah.
And so here we have Carolus III, Charles III.
Oh, yeah.
And of course,
English.
Spanish.
Oh, Spanish.
Yes, and what we have is this is 1795. No, this is Charles IV, actually. So this was the successor, but that is 1795, and this coin approximates the construction of the San Carlos Cathedral. And while I was doing excavations there, because I'm an archaeologist, we discovered the Sarah Chapel, 1771 and 72.
Yeah.
On the back, when you look at the coin on the back, you have the Pillars of Hercules, which represent essentially the Strait of Gibraltar. And the two columns and the banner represents plus ultra, far beyond, and in other words, to the New World. And this ultimately, by virtue of the 13 colonies and Benjamin Franklin, they had no mint, so they were going to Mexico City to retrieve silver and gold coins from Mexico City under the Spanish Empire. And so as a result, this symbol became the American dollar sign. And so this is part of that legacy. And then, of course, the coinage often came in very small denominations. And so this is
Tiny.
From the Mexican era, but it's gold.
It's gold.
Yes,
Wow.
This is solid gold, and basically it represents the transition from the Spanish to the Mexican era. And of course, you had some rather exuberant spending during that period.
Wow.
I was going to
interesting.
share with you a couple
I
of
never
others.
saw a coin so tiny.
Yeah, and here's another one, and this
but
one,
gold.
and these, of course, silver. This one is 1812, so there was a war fought in that year, I believe.
Right. That's right.
And then this one is another, this is 1803. And I collect these because when I do talks, I like to hand them around to the children so they get a sense of that history.
Yeah.
And this is 1834. So this is the kind of coinage that was being produced in Mexico City for this region. So this is the kind of coinage the Boronda family would have been using. And then this piece here, and I can go ahead and take that. So let's see. this represents an even earlier iteration of the history of the region. Let's see if I can get it open. I have some severe carpal tunnel, so my hands don't do what they should be doing. Do you recognize this?
I don't. Looks ancient, though.
Yes, it is, and it's these are pieces of 8. I believe this is 15.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a 16th century coin. And anyway, these are known as pieces of 8, and this was taken from a ship that went down that had been involved in piracy. And this particular one had already had one of the pieces of 8 removed. So they would cut them, and then they would use that as currency.
Wow.
And then finally, I think
That's interesting. Pieces of 8, so that they come from England?
I'll let you hold
they?
these.
Sure.
Let's see, and then I'll take and put these in.
Wow, these are like, you have a really nice collection
Well,
here.
I was doing this when I was doing docent tours at Mission San Juan Bautista for years, and we'd have a lot of children come through. So I also had an espada ancha, which was a Spanish sword, and when the children were being boisterous, I'd lift it up and they would go quiet. Anyway, you get an idea of the various coinage, and this one is 1748, so it predates essentially California missions. This one is 1781, so this is the period of Junipero Serra. And then this one, again, is it's Carolus the Fourth, 1790. So again, it postdates Charles III. The majority of them, for example, this one is Charles III, and his palace is in Madrid, Spain. It's a massive complex. It's incredible. And of course, many of the so-called Bourbon reforms of the 18th century, which anticipated the founding of the missions, basically sought to protect native rights, and that wasn't always a popular thing. But the Enlightenment was afoot, and there were many things of that nature going on.
Yeah.
So by using coinage, I'm able to kind of address some of that history. Yes, a timeline.
Make a timeline.
So when we shift to the context here, and especially the history of this site is significant for the fact that this represented one of the largest land grants of all of Central California. It originally was some 7,200 acres. It was the land grant was granted by the Mexican government in 1840 to Jose Eusebio Boronda and his family. Initially, El Tucho, and we have the maps that show the El Tucho land grant, that was granted, but there had to be improvements on the land before the entire grant could be administered or ceded over. And so what happened is apparently the Borondas left for the Big Sur area, and they stayed on a ranch there, eventually returning for El Tucho. And then southwest of here, they built their first adobe. And that adobe was built with the objective of improving the land, which then formalized the land grant. And in so doing, what we have is that adobe was essentially a Mexican adobe. This, of course, is distinct. It's a Monterey colonial style. But that one does have the so-called teja roof tiles or mission-style roof tiles. Had all the characteristics of a Mexican adobe. But this entire region was essentially much like Moss Landing. You know, it was essentially waterways. And so they built their adobe on a kind of a knoll in the middle of all that, not anticipating all the mosquitoes and the flooding. And so after literally a couple of years, they shifted over here, because that was 1840. They came out over here on this higher ground, and they began construction in 1844. Initially digging the trenches on the Boronda adobe, and then once they had the footers in place, they began building the walls. And because Jose Eusebio was a freighter, in other words, he hauled lumber for the mill of Thomas Larkin, which was in the area of Pacific Grove, he became pretty conversant in this kind of style, especially since Larkin propagated it in his properties in Monterey. And so what's distinct about this style is this really is a reflection of the admixture or the hybridization of the Mexican style with the American traditions. And so what you have is that, you have, for example, the arcade that runs around the entire perimeter. You have the core, which is an adobe structure. And then, of course, you have the doorways and windows have what looks like not a pedestal, a pediment, and it has the design of a Roman temple. This is a very simplistic version of it, but that was the intent, is to translate that style over. And then of course the dormer, which is more of a New England feature, reflects the American traditions along with the red brick, which starts coming in really much later, but after 1850s. So let's go on in.
Yeah.
I just published a book with Rizzoli called Casa Santa Fe. I actually have copies in the office.
Oh, yeah.
And that book actually documents this style, which you could call them Monterey colonial. There they call it the territorial. And you get the introduction of red brick, coping around the building. Americans were really concerned about, the buildings eroding, also the appearance. They were trying to differentiate from the Mexican style. And so you do have all of that.
Wow.
Over on your right, you see that, what looks like a clump of cement there. That's about a 200 million year old crab. I mean, not a clam, I should say. And it's, I can't tell you where it came from, but I've often brought visitors, and sometimes my students do, and as soon as they see it, they start laughing, because they're used to clams being much smaller, like clam chowder sized. And then, of course, we have our horno, and the horno is a replica, but it reflects the type of ovens used for the baking of bread. They have an 8,000-year pedigree in the Middle East, and eventually they were adopted by the Spanish after the Islamic invasions of the Iberian Peninsula after 711 AD.
Right. I know about that because I've done some study of the Muslims in Al-Andalusia.
Oh yes, yes.
Al-Andalusia. So yeah, the Moors came from the 8th century till the
1492.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so they had quite a very nice culture.
Yes, they had a tremendous impact on the Iberian Peninsula.
Yeah.
Al-Andalusia, Al-Andalus, and then of course the Mudéjar, which are the craftsmen who were left behind, continued to influence the Spanish court.
Right.
And I've been in the palace or the castle of Isabella and Ferdinand, and the whole interior is Islamic.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, wait a minute, they conquered these people,
Yeah.
but they adopt their traditional
Right.
design styles.
Well, they had the whole, they discovered all the waterways and the,
Yes.
Being able to get water to the people during that time.
Yes, they
Irrigation, the
irrigation systems
and also lighting
yes,
in the streets.
solar geometry was very big in
Yeah.
that tradition.
Yeah.
Let me walk you around the building.
Sure.
Actually, let's go this way.
Okay.
One of the things that we're seeking to do, and I was just mentioning this, is that I've been tasked with trying to raise $100,000 to replace the roof. You'll see that the last few storms blew away a number of the tiles.
Yeah.
And but in order to do this, where we have some longevity, we're going to have to basically lay down plyboard to make sure that when the shingles deteriorate, they don't allow the water to run in, because that's about what we're going to experience in the next storms.
That would cause
it
some
would cause
damage,
a lot of
water damage.
And so I've been working on it, but most grants don't cover that kind of work.
I mean, is this the original?
Well, this is, there's a lot of the wood here is original, but of course they reshingled the building back in the 70s.
Okay.
So what you see up there essentially is 50 years old.
I see.
And it's surprising that shingles of this type have survived 50 years.
Yeah.
Usually
50
their
years
longevity is about 30, if that. So what we hope to do is actually redo and basically encase the building with plyboard, and then place composite shingles that, not in the sense of tar shingles, but rather shingles that look very much like this, but they're synthetic, so that way they have a little greater longevity.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so otherwise...
Keep the moisture out.
Yes, and that's the prime objective.
Yeah. Nice trees, too, around here. Are these, olive trees?
Yes, these are olive trees, and we have quite a photo collection, and now we have the Hathaway collection as well, and it clearly documents that these trees were not here, turn of the 19th century.
They were.
Yeah, there were other trees here, and there was a well a water well over on this corner, but I
Wow.
fear that perhaps when they put in the ramps, they might have either impacted or destroyed it. I believe it's under that sidewalk over there, maybe in the flower garden, but we do have photos of what appeared to have been a well.
Yeah, when I walked through the
Here you see one of the original beams that still has the sockets.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so they retrofitted many of these to alter it and then get to the restoration.
I know when I walked through the one in Monterey, the house.
Hello,
that's
how are you?
across
Good
from
morning.
the customer.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Yeah, we're
Um,
going through and doing a tour of the
Okay.
Adobe, and so you're just in time.
Okay, good.
And of course, we have exposed areas.
Yeah.
We've been told by an architect, actually Beckham came through, and he was talking about the fact that these corners, there's some subsidence involved. Probably moisture got in, and so some of the original impacted rock
Yeah, this looks like
affected it.
rock.
This is Adobe, actually.
Adobe.
Yeah, this is Adobe, but the rock foundations. When I was working in the California missions, basically I came across through Marta Schutz-Miller the translation of a Spanish document from the anonymous architect. Sounds like the anonymous comedian or whatever.
Yeah.
But this architect laid out all the principles for architecture in Mexico City, earthquake resistant architecture. And it turns out that the principles adhere to the missions and many of the adobes of the region. So typically, if you had let's say you were going to build a wall of this height, you would have it would be a 1-to-3 ratio. So if you had 1 meter of footing, foundation, you'd have 3 meters of wall height. And the same thing goes for the missions. There's a 1-to-5 ratio depending on the size of the building and the seismicity of the zone.
Okay.
So when you say the floor, you mean the foundation?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, the foundation, because what they would do is they would dig these fairly deep trenches, and I've excavated trenches at San Juan Bautista, Carmel Mission, the Spanish World Presidio Monterey, Soledad, and also I was involved in a project where a colleague, Bob Hoover, was excavating the foundations of the front of Mission San Miguel after the 2000, that was the 2003 earthquake.
And what are they made of? How do they
Oh,
create the
well,
foundation?
most of these buildings are green buildings, literally, and they've been awarded that status in modern times. But they're using elements that are natural to the earth. They will take, for example, chalk, rock, or lime, and they will grind it down until they can make the plaster. The adobe, of course, is from soil deposits that are clayey, and then the foundations around here are typically shale, because we have the Monterey Shale Formation. And so virtually all of the sites that I've excavated have Monterey Shale. The only departure from that was the Sarah Chapel that we excavated, which dates to 1771 and 72 at the Royal Presidio. And that did have granite blocks in it.
So is that shale, is it how does it stick together? I mean,
What they do is they take the shale, if you've seen it, you can break it up into a lot of different shapes and sizes. So it really comes down to rubble fill. You dig your trench, and the trench serves as literally the container. And you pack it down.
with
and-
bits of shale.
Yeah, bits of shale, usually blocks, pretty good sized blocks, and then you intersperse them with other, and then you drop, caliche, typically caliche clay, which hardens, almost rock hard.
Okay, so these are like forever foundations.
Yes, yeah. The problem is if you expose a building like this to water, portions of it will begin to settle because the foundations have now been compromised. So let me show you this area.
Yeah, but you know that the house across, maybe it's the custom house?
Oh, yes.
And they were telling me, you were talking about the well, they were telling me that there was a well there, but they filled it in.
Yeah. I've excavated wells, and they are a treasure trove.
Yeah, I'm
it's-
like,
it's
why
San
did
Juan-
they fill in the well?
Well, I said well.
Yeah, well.
yeah, well.
It's a very deep subject.
Yes, it's a very deep subject, and
Yeah.
But the same thing happened at the Spanish World Presidio, where we have the San Carlos Cathedral. I ran into Don Howard one day. He came out to observe my excavations, and while doing the excavations, he walked up and he said I don't know if you knew who Don Howard was. He was an avocational archaeologist, He looked like the spitting image of Andy Warhol, but in usual cut-off shorts and a Hawaiian T-shirt, with a hairy chest. And well, he was rather eccentric. He would go about, construction projects, collecting human remains, and he had the house filled with them when he died. But he came up one day, and for a fee, he was willing to answer questions I had. And I thought, well, we don't have the funds for that kind of fee. But he pointed out some areas, and he said, you see the parking lot, and this is at the Spanish Well Presidio.
Right.
He pointed to the parking lot, he says, that's where I found a double well. There were two wells side by side. And then he could identify all the ceramic types that were in the excavation unit we were excavating, all the various myolicas and other materials. The window again, here you see this pediment-like element, which is intended to represent the Greek Revival style. And I was consulting with the folks at the Moraga Adobe, and they're way up in Moraga, California, and they're in the middle of restoring an adobe that they purchased for $500,000 from a developer who was about to demolish it. And the family, the descendants, actually rounded up the funding. They've since received several state grants, but the developer, the contractors, had a different idea about historic preservation. They wanted to pour a concrete slab in the middle of this adobe floor, and I stopped them. I said, you can't do that.
Is it an adobe building or just the floor is adobe?
No, the entire building was adobe, but the original floor was like the one you'll see in here in a minute. It was redwood planks, and usually runners, redwood planks, and these were used as fandango parlors, so people would dance. And so the group that was doing this was concerned about the contractor said, oh no, you'll still be able to do your dances by putting thin wood planks. And I said, no, that's not going to work. And there were elements like this, but they were fancier. And even the family members said, no, we need to rip those out. It doesn't look primitive enough. And I said, well, what you're doing is you're kind of creating an ethnocentric characterization of your own ancestors who, let's face it, they owned thousands of acres of land. They had redwood forests, and they would barter. And so they may have been, cash poor, but they were real estate rich, and they would give off a piece of land in exchange for, the fineries of life. They would bring in, they would import, Parisian beds, canopy beds. I've seen them in various adobes in New Mexico. And so they would splurge from time to time, but they lived, rather, most people characterize it as an idyllic life. They're they're ranchers, and they've got cattle, and it's like Yellowstone. If you watch that series, they're living an ideal life, but they have their challenges. And the challenges are ultimately what kind of brought down the rancheros. But they did integrate these elements. And when I was at the Moraga, they were in the process of tearing all this out. I said, don't do that.
Is that a private home or is it a public building?
Well, it's technically been purchased by an organization, the Friends of the Moraga Adobe, and they've been able to raise over $500,000 for the purchase. And the developer agreed to do upgrades, but he's trying to cut corners. And then they had, and I'll show you that area where the dormer is located, that became a storage area. Because you have to bear in mind that if you've been in any of the missions or farmlands, you get field mice coming in, and they'll eat away your entire crop.
I've never seen a field mouse.
I have.
Here?
I suspect they do. I've never seen one, but they do have traps out for them.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, I know.
Dead field mice.
They have probably gophers. I see gophers.
Yeah, we have plenty of those.
Plenty of gophers. So where you have gophers, you probably have mice.
Yeah, and I'm sure that they're a factor in a lot of the topics. But even if I do have plenty of book, then you can see that a lot of
It's interesting how it kind of slopes like that.
yes, well, that is a characteristic of the Monterey colonial style. Because you do have a walkabout here, and then of course you have essentially what is akin to a hipped roof, but it's been truncated. You have the colonnade, which is very typical, one of the introductions from Al-Andalus, and then of course you have the Greek Revival style, which is definitively an American introduction.
I would never have thought this was Greek Revival Adobe.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's the American introduction. And it's here, you can see it's torn down.
Yeah, what does this
other
thing say?
adobes that are even so much more apparent.
1844.
Oh, I beat him to it.
1844 and
Yes, so between 1848,
1848.
it's an outstanding example of Mexican-era rancho adobe, virtually unaltered since its construction.
So that's like during the gold rush, pretty much.
Yes, yeah, right before the gold rush, this is what California was like. Right before Sloat landed, and ultimately the takeover and the signing of the Tratado or Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
Wow.
It's basically, this was a kind of a moment in time right before that happened. And of course, we almost lost the adobe, during the quake of, was it 89? They had to come in and retrofit it.
Really?
Yeah, so, we've had our challenges with this site.
I didn't know that quake was so.
Yeah, it caused damage.
And
there.
is this the original site?
Yes, you're looking at the original. In fact, come over here and I'll show you what other things.
I mean, I know that the quake in San Francisco 1906, but I didn't think that 89 quake was so damaging.
Yeah, it caused damage. In fact, I did a study of the Carmel mission, and there were some of the docents there, whenever they would meet with visitors, the visitors say, why is the Mudahar or Star of Bethlehem window crooked? And the response was, well, it's because the Indians didn't know how to build this stuff. No, the whole facade was compromised in the earthquake of 1812. There was a massive quake. 1800 affected San Juan Bautista. It brought down their entire quadrangle. I excavated that, and we found the secondary, the original chapel of 1797, and we also found the original quadrangle. There's two quadrangles in San Juan. The second quadrangle was much more massive, and so after 1800, they built out that entire quadrangle on a much more formidable scale.
Nice.
Just trying to find the right key here.
Yeah, I went to San Juan Bautista's library for the first time on Wednesday because I needed to park and get off the freeway, and I found the Mustard King's cabin. Are you familiar with that?
Oh yes, Jim Jack.
Yeah, I was totally unaware of.
Well, the Luck Museum, when I was working at San Juan, the San Juan Historical Society asked, because I was coordinating with, well, let's just say the minimum security trustees from Soledad Prison. I'd bring out a dozen of them every week with their guard and commander, and we had about a 3-year project, and one day we were approached to help get that old gas station.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and so I asked the guys, you guys want to tear apart a gas station? And in other words, well, it was really to restore it, but it was totally in shambles. Windows were broken. I said, I need all of these windows removed. I need this, that. And they went in there, and one of the men who had done 16 years in San Quentin, his father was a stonemason and a contractor. So he had learned all that. He came in and he re-cemented a lot of the damaged areas of the building, and then we were able to help them get that put up as a museum. Shortly thereafter, I went to the state park. They had a yard, and the entire Jim Jack cabin was literally in a pile of trash. So I myself and several other preservationists there approached the state park and said, why isn't this not in a more prominent place? And they said, oh, it's not period appropriate.
Yeah, they said 1800 is the cutoff date.
That's bullshit.
Or 1880.
Because, for me, my concern was he was a formidable figure in that community.
Yeah, and we don't know about him unless you just happen to be there.
Yeah, exactly. And so my feeling was there are a lot of other things in that main quadrangle that are not period appropriate. And I felt that building, by virtue of its significance to the community, needed to be maintained.
Yeah, I just learned about it Wednesday, so just by chance.
The log cabin that's there, that's not period appropriate either.
I didn't see the log cabin.
Yeah, it's in a little park on the corner right across from the Mission, adjacent to the Plaza Hotel.
Okay, I didn't go to the Mission. I just went to the library and the cabin this last Wednesday. But I went to the 3 boxes archives too.
Yeah.
And the woman who donated the land, I think it was like Francisca, her attorney, she lived in Salinas, and her attorney was Mr. Van Noy. And I thought, I had a school teacher in Mission Park named Mrs. Van Noy.
Oh,
I think that's his sister-in-law.
Yeah,
so
probably.
It's all,
No, it's
It's all weird that you stumble upon things that it's all connected.
no. There's a lot of when I worked at San Juan for roughly 18 years, and I had a benefactor for 5 of those, and we completely redid the library, the gift shop, and it started getting way too political. Every time I tried to do something that we got community attacks, and I thought maybe it's time to leave, and I kind of moved out of that.
Yeah, I'm not.
But we got a lot done. We got a lot done. Well, the reason I'm showing you this is this gives you a sense.
It looks
This
kind of like a
building-
barn or something
Yeah,
in there.
well, what happened is in the late 1800s, the family apparently had outgrown the adobe proper, and so they decided to enclose the entirety of the arcade around the building, and in the process, this was converted into the kitchen. And then other areas, they had a saddlery in here, leatherworking. They had a blacksmithing area.
So this was once outside. and they
Yes, this would have
closed
been what was once they closed it. This is the only portion that was preserved, just to give a sense of what it looked like when the 1974 restoration took place.
it. Okay, so there was more enclosed area all around.
Yeah, 'cause I see
Oh
they
yes,
have
the
beams
entirety of
to-
it.
to hold the
There are
floor.
photos on the interior that will give you a sense of what that looked like. So
And it-
yeah, and you'll note how when you look down, that's the original grade. And what I've found during the excavations at San Juan Bautista, Soledad, Carmel, and at the Royal Presidio is that in each instance, the grade is approximately 2 feet 200 years ago. So a lot of this soil has built up during that period. And because the adobes, as they melt, they literally increment the soil and the grade keeps rising. So.
What's that rectangle thing?
That's probably, it could have been, they were doing demonstrations. You have
Brick making? or-
Yeah, brick making. Those would have been ladrillos. That's about the right size. And then these vertical sticks were being used for roping demonstrations. On September 9th, we were accepted by the California Preservation Foundation to do a Rancho Days. We're calling it Rancho Days at the Adobe. And we're bringing in cowboys, a blacksmith, and I'll be walking around in my 1830s Mexican militia uniform. I have it here today.
Nice.
Just didn't get a chance to put it on.
It's
But-
authentic from the 1830s?
no, it's a
Oh.
recreation based on an actual uniform.
Oh, okay.
Again, Arch Hayes, the person I acquired this from,
Yeah.
he offered to, once I purchased this, he offered to sell me, I think, the shalico, the helmet. And then I said, well, what about the rest of the uniform? And then eventually, he just kept incrementing the number of things.
Wow,
And before I know it, I had the whole uniform.
Traditional buildings with wood, take out the wood frames, and it's like they say, oh, but they're modern and airtight, and it's not cold.
Yes, I do historic assessments all throughout the county, and I have 4 projects right now. One of them is this incredible house that's near Brad Pitt's home in in the Carmel Highlands, and we think it was the same architect, Green and Green, out of Los Angeles and Carmel, and it's just majestic. And I believe it really merits National Historic Register status. But we're putting it on the local registries as well as the state registry. But we're still trying to find details, and it had an incredible history. What is it? Famous authors. One of the princes, the sons of the founder of Saudi Arabia, was there for a period. There were Japanese diplomats living there and owned the property
Which city?
during World War II.
Which city is this?
This is Carmel Highlands.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and now we put in our report, and it reads like a novel. And so they've now asked me to come back and follow up with Green and Green in Pasadena. So we'll
And
see.
who are you working for when you do all these assessments?
Well, I've been doing them since about for 23 years now, and so and I'm trained as an archaeologist, architectural historian. But most of the assessments I do are archaeology. Those are the majority, but. I've been getting more and more calls.
Okay, so you're independent.
Yes, I'm independent. Yeah. These are plants that I donated.
They
we
look like crab apples, are they?
Well, not
No.
really. These are tunas, and
Oh,
these
okay.
are nopales or prickly pear cacti.
Oh, prickly pear. That's
Yeah.
what it is. Prickly
These
pear.
were from my backyard, but I was given heritage plants from Paula Mission, the Asistencia or the Submission of San Luis Rey de Francia. And these basically trace back to about 1812.
These actual plants.
Yes,
Oh.
yeah, these are cuttings from 1812.
Nice.
And I just thought they're not going to do anybody any good in my backyard, and they were not doing really well. So I had my students, as part of a service project, plant these. And as I was bringing them out, they were tall, standing plants, and they broke apart. And so I had them, disperse them. And we're probably going to cut them and then reconfigure them. But I think this is more appropriate, because this is what you would have found in an old adobe, and they would have served as a source of food. Once you burn away the spines, and then you cut the tunas once they're ripe, and they're delicious.
So do you ever eat these?
Yes, I've eaten. You can go to restaurants here and eat the same
Yeah, because
thing.
I have it in my front yard, but I've never had the actual fruit. I just have the leaves.
Let's see. Let me just make sure the lights are on.
I wonder what these big rock things are. I think they are bolted down.
I think they're grinding.
Grinding wheels,
These are
yeah.
grinding stones.
Oh.
Yeah, what would happen, and if you've ever been to San Antonio, Texas,
No.
they have the missions there. And that was recently put on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2012. There was a team recruited to assess the site, and I was part of the team. And they have a mill, and it's water run. They actually still have one of the acequias or canals, comes in, and basically it turns a wheel down at the bottom, it spins very fast, and it actually triggers the grinding mechanism. You pour in the wheat, and it is delicious. It comes out very quickly. It has a very sweet taste to it.
Nice.
Basically, what you're looking at is the core of the building. The wooden walls that you see here were essentially added after the original build, and so we believe that those are probably dated to about the primary construction was 1844 to 1848. We believe these came in within the next 20 years. I do have a publication that we did on this building, and so if you're interested, I can give you my card. You email me, and I'll send you a PDF copy of that. And it goes into much greater detail, more on the level of an architectural history that includes the rancho and its reformulation. One of the things I didn't say is that there was some conflict in the family. Jose Eusebio left for a period. When he came back, his children tried to sue him for the land. And of course, he filed a claim, and his children lost. He retained the land. But by the time it was all said and done, when the American surveys came through in the 1850s, the black maps and all the rest that were done, he ended up with only 1/3 of the total land base that was original. Because I don't know how they could miss the river. The river was one of the boundaries, but he ended up with 1/3, and that land grant became the source of a lot of the conflict between his other family members. Ultimately, it was all parceled off through the course of time. And it was this 1 5-acre parcel was donated to the Monterey County Historical Society. And so we're about to celebrate the anniversaries of that, the restoration, a bunch of other things. When you look at the Boronda family history, what you have is a history that extends back with Jose Manuel Boronda. And you note that he was born in 1790 in Guadalajara, Mexico. He married Maria Gertrudis Higuera, who was born in Monterey in 1776. So Maria was, alive during the life of Junipero Serra. Junipero Serra passed away in 1784, and so she may have likely attended services, whether at the Royal Presidio Chapel or at Carmel. There was a bit of a trek to get over the hill. I've done that trek, and it's impressive. But Jose Manuel Boronda, there are family histories that claim he accompanied Sarah into California on the Sacred Expedition. However, the problem with that is that took place in 1869-70. And so you see, he wasn't around then.
No.
So that's a little bit of the myth, but I think it was Maria Gertrudis was the one that is identified with Sarah. It's just that he was a soldier at the Spanish Royal Presidio of San Francisco, and he left San Francisco after retirement, came to Monterey, and he built the adobe that's on the hill above the San Carlos Cathedral. I don't know if you've been there. It recently sold for 3.5 million.
You mean in Monterey?
Yes.
I've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was Jose Manuel Boronda's Adobe, and his son was Jose Eusebio Boronda, who was born in 1808. Jose Manuel opened, basically was one of the first public school teachers in Monterey. So public education technically began with Jose Manuel Boronda. And then his son, and bear in mind he had been a soldier, built the Adobe, opened it up, and then a neighbor opened up a school for girls at close to the same location. That inspiration led Jose Eusebio to open this up as a school for young children, and so this location would have been another of those schools. And then of course you see the rest of the family members. In those days, like with my grandfather, he was the product of 18 children from a well-to-do family, but during the Mexican Revolution he eschewed wealth and he married this orphaned Indian woman who was my grandmother, Yaqui Indian. They never got along. They fought just like the Spanish and the Indians always did. But in the end, they stuck it out all the way to the end. So here you see a portrait of Jose Eusebio Boronda, and then a painting of Jose Manuel Boronda, his father. One of the things that I found as I was going through the historic assessments that had been done of this building, the writers in the 1970s made an incredible effort to minimize the contribution of the Boronda family. I got suspicious of that. So I went further and further through the records. They even went so far as to claim that they were not ranchers. In other words, they were indolent, did nothing, contributed nothing, and yet these are their cattle brands. And this is the one found under the floor by James Perry, who's been here since he was 16.
Wow.
Yeah, it was found under the floor. This is the original cattle brand. And then these are subsequent cattle brands that were basically patented by the family because they were into a cowboy or vaquero lifestyle. Charros, if you will. When we look over here, we get elements, materials that are from the family, whether they be spurs, pictures of the cowboys. The condition of the Boronda Adobe before the June 72 restoration. This is when they were doing basically the Historic American Building Survey project at this site. When you look over here, you see that Mexican-styled adobe that's buried under the fields southwest of us. And you'll note that it indicates here that this is after the 1906 quake. So the building was significantly damaged. But you get an idea of the building up on the upper, and it may well be that that claim is that is a 1933 photo. And I'm a little skeptical, but I realize we're looking at two sides of the same building.
What, the top one is 1933?
Yeah, 1933, and yet 1906, that's what it looked like because of the damage. I don't believe they rebuilt it. I believe that maybe what we're looking at is a later photo and the building is still somewhat intact, but the other side has collapsed.
So it was abandoned after that?
Yes, it was abandoned. One of the things about that building, interestingly, as I noted before, this was an area that looked very much like Moss Landing. It had, it was essentially a marsh, so you had waterfowl, but one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, the Borondas couldn't handle the mosquitoes and the flooding. And at one point, while Fremont was in the area, they basically chased some American deserters into this area, and they apparently holed up in that adobe. And as a result, they were captured there and then taken back to Monterey. So there's a lot of stories about this. What happened to the marshes, or the area when it looked more like Moss Landing, was that when the railroad came through in 1870 and it was completed, the Chinese workmen were basically commissioned, because they were now unemployed, to drain the marshes, like Trump's old saying. But the
dirty job.
Yeah, dirty jobs. I'm going to do it. You start with yourself. But anyway, so the Chinese workmen basically took to draining this entire area, and they were almost single-handedly responsible for making it agriculturally viable. And then, of course, they moved on as well. We do have the Chinatown in downtown Salinas, which they're trying to revive at this point. But it was a product of that particular time.
Yeah, I've been doing some research about Chinatowns in California, and some about that You know, so I know that they burnt it down in 1900,
Yeah.
and that one there, because a lot of wooden structures.
Yes.
So they really burnt it down, and it was kind of a malicious act. It wasn't like
Yeah.
an accident.
It was like what happened in Monterey. And, you know, one of the things I was going to say is I worked with the ACE group, Asian Cultural Experience, for service learning. I had my students basically go through, clean, and then identify all of the ceramics and materials from a latrine that was dug up in Chinatown.
Wow.
And so we took all
That's
that material.
interesting.
Yeah, and we published a little booklet through MagCloud, which is really for teachers and children. You go through and you see individual ceramics.
Yeah.
One of the items that was in that latrine was actually a Ming Dynasty porcelain that had been fractured. And we have a nice big chunk of it that came out of there with all the really delicate elements to it.
Yeah. Because I've been doing some study about the family that was there, and he was kind of like, he was the merchant class.
Yes.
So, because, you know, if you weren't in the merchant class, then because of the Exclusion Act, you couldn't really be here.
Yeah, no, a lot of, there were a lot of
And so the merchant class was
restrictions.
able to do a lot of import-export from China. So it makes sense that you would have some, you know, ancient Chinese things there.
Yeah, let me take you into this area. We were fortunate back in the
What is this? Is this redwood?
It's redwood planks.
Nice.
And, you know, the thing is that during the course of the archaeological studies, I've learned of redwood groves. There were many more than obviously there are today. There was even one near San Juan Bautista, which I was unaware of, where they were drawing planks, but at San Juan Bautista, they were bringing most of the planks out of the Santa Cruz area.
Yeah.
But there were there were viable redwood forests throughout. This particular area, and most of the adobe was reconfigured after the restoration by the Colonial Dames, who recently gave us a grant for $5,000.
Yeah.
And those are, I believe James picked those up at Target. But bear in mind that the so-called willow pattern is one that goes all the way back. And I've excavated virtually identical ceramics in the California missions from about the early 1800s onward.
Nice.
So what the Colonial Dames did was they tried to configure this as a dining and kitchen area, but the reality is the kitchen would have been outside. And so what you have is essentially kind of a mock-up of some of the kinds of tools and utensils that would have been characteristic. We did have some very scary butcher knives there, and I advised that we might want to remove those because of the children. You know,
This looks kind of, something Chinese.
What is this?
Pottery.
It's a grater. I'm not, you know, I personally don't know how it would
I
have been
can't
used
read what
specifically.
it says.
It's a fluter. So,
For kitchen? Or?
yeah, apparently so. I'm not sure if you have an idea of how that was used. Looks like brass knuckles to me, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a fluter.
Flute or maybe for a pie.
Yeah, I suspect so.
The edge of a pie.
But we have a number of original items. Many of the items in here were part of the Boronda family collections.
Yeah, these are nice.
These two items I donated. These are olive jars, early 18th century. They were. I have a dear friend. She's in her 80s now. She's infirm, and she's trying to donate her entire book collection. And there were items that she gave me, including an incredible part of the Bancroft set on California, the original first edition.
Yeah.
And then another that she gave me was the writings of Sahagún in Mexico in Spanish from a 19th century edition.
Nice.
And then she's asked me as a trustee to make sure things find a home. So these, rather than try to cart them around to different museums, I donated them here.
Yeah.
And those would have been for olive oil.
Nice.
We have the metates, which have a pedigree of some 5,000 years in Mesoamerica for maize processing. And of course, we have a number of spinning wheels. The one on the left with the large wheel on it, apparently it is said to date from the 1840s, and so it's period appropriate, but it's clearly an American design,
Yeah.
and we need to reassemble it, so that was donated recently.
Oh, yeah.
Let's, this case is essentially the equivalent of a hope chest that was created by Eusebio for his daughter who married a Frenchman, and their little story is right on the other side of the door here.
Oh, wow.
But,
Look at the hearts on
yes,
there.
exactly.
Oh, that's really cute. Oh, Jess.
When we look through some of the other materials, if you're curious what people did before laptops, this is one of the things that they did. This is the equivalent of a laptop. And this has the mudéjar, inlay. It was an Iberian introduction into Mexico. It became popular throughout the Americas. And of course, they carried their pens and quills in these boxes. But you see, this one was probably mounted on the back of a saddle or a wagon. And you have a lot of the wear and tear of the hinges and the
Oh,
ornaments.
this inlay is like really.
Yes.
This design is very kind of Islamic, isn't it?
Yes, no, that is precisely
Yeah.
what we're looking at. So
Yeah, wow, that's beautiful. Where'd you get that?
that is original. This was a part of the collection.
Wow.
So as far as its specific pedigree, I'm not. This is actually one that I acquired, and I put it on long-term loan. But it's early 18th century Spanish,
Oh.
and you get a sense of the hardware, and that for me is something that I try to get across when it comes to the kinds of details that are there, and so you get a sense of that. We'll step over here. When we look at the saddles and the other materials that are here,
Yeah.
the saddle collection, I'd like to see it moved into another space once we have the warehouse further
Oh,
developed. But it does give a sense of the cowboy tradition. And of course, you have the women's saddles here, so they would ride side saddle. And then you have the Mexican saddle over on the far right. The Mexican saddle gives you more of a sense of the detail and the kind of work that was being done. Very elaborate, and these, typically 19th century. And then, of course, you have, when you look at the cowboy tradition, you have the chaps that you see here. Well, these were known as chapas, and so chapas are very much a part of that tradition. And much of the terminology of the American cowboy literally draws straight out of the Mexican era as well as the Spanish colonial period. Yeah, we're going through and covering a little bit about the history and heritage of this building. You were here yesterday. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
We're all together. I'm gonna just keep listening. Yeah.
okay. Oh, good. Okay.
Is this like an original, or is this something that's...
That is simply a duplicate.
Oh.
In fact, we're working on a video on the history of this site, and I dressed as a Mexican militia soldier with my uniform from the 1830s. And I was sitting here, and I sit down and I'm pretending to write with a quill pen. Well, then after doing this, I realized the inkwell was empty, and so we're going to have to digitize. But that is actually a letter from our archive. We have the so-called Spanish archives. We have letters from 1770 in Junipero Serra's hand. 20,000 of these documents covering the entirety of the history of Monterey and this region, all the way through the 1850s. And that's just the Mexican collection, which we recently had digitized. Unfortunately, the person that digitized them, you have these are bound volumes, 16 of them, and the person, as he was digitizing them, you have the large letters, and then you'd have small envelopes and maybe smaller letters. He didn't bother changing out the letters so you could see what was underneath the envelopes. So we probably have hundreds of documents that didn't get properly scanned. This room gives you a sense, in the period where the Borondas were here, you likely did have a canopy bed because those were very popular in the mid-19th century. This is kind of a mock-up of what you might have seen, although we wouldn't have had those metal poles up there.
Right.
Those are modern. But it gives you kind of a sense of the conditions and maybe a little bit of the frills that they would have had. On the other hand, if it wasn't a metate or a straw mat that you would unroll in the floor, the family would probably sleep in a common room. You had beds like this, and this is very common for the period. In fact, they're still being used in Guatemala and Honduras, and I often tell the story of having been on a bus at the end of the Guatemalan Civil War, and the bus driver was going to go over the mountain pass into Honduras, and we were stopped by soldiers at about 10 o'clock at night because there were guerrillas that were attacking the buses. So we were told to turn around. We went to a place where it was a Maya village with thatched huts, but there was one government building to protect the bus drivers, cinder block, no doors, no running water, no electricity, and a corrugated tin roof. And I was standing by the door, and I was going to, I asked how much for the room, and she said the equivalent of $1 a night. And I thought, well, you can't beat that. It's not exactly a Marriott, but it would do.
Yeah.
And since I was hiking through the mountains and I was traveling to archaeological zones, I remember, the moonlight was out, and I was leaned up against the door, and I saw something about the size of my hand move away from my hand. So I pulled out my penlight flashlight, aimed it, and it was a spider as big as a tarantula, but it wasn't a tarantula. And I thought, what the heck? And I aimed the flashlight around the room, and there were centipedes just zooming down the walls. There were scorpions of various sizes, some really big ones, and then really small ones. And I thought, any of this is toxic. And so I asked the Indian woman, I said, I asked her, before I noticed all the other creatures, I asked her, are these spiders poisonous? Because I noticed that the bed was welded to the floor with cobwebs, and there was one hanging over the bed. And she said, oh, no, you'll be fine. She says, my husband was bitten 2 weeks ago. He's better now. and I said, I can't afford to be bitten because I'm traveling.
Yeah.
And so what ultimately happened was she said, well, I'll send my son in to spray. He had one of those old pump sprayers. And I go across this dirt road to another woman's, a chosa or hut. And she cooked some food for us, me and the other guy I was traveling with. Mm-hmm. We come back maybe half an hour later, and I stepped in, and these bugs had come out, everything had come out from under the rafters. And so even she was horrified. She said, I can't let you sleep in here, maybe the next room. Well, of course, it was a common ceiling, so everything was open.
So they can go to the
Yeah,
next room.
they were in the next room. And so I just decided not to think about it. I paid the woman for the room.
Not to think about.
Yeah, but what I did was I took the duct tape. I always carry duct tape when I travel, and I duct taped my wrists. I duct taped my collar, my boots, and I thought if I'm going to be bitten, it's going to be in the face where I can see it, because there's going to be payback, And I managed to about 1 in the morning. I still couldn't sleep. And like an idiot, I pulled out my penlight flashlight, aimed it, and the first thing I see is a centipede going down the wall. I thought, oh. And
these are big centipedes.
Yeah, they were these really long centipedes, and then you had smaller ones, everything imaginable in there. And so I'm trying to sleep, and about 1 in the morning, a thunderstorm started, and then the corrugated tin roof was being pelted, and it was like a roaring thunder in there. But anyway, that was that experience. Next morning, it was water that was essentially a glass of mud. And I asked her, is this potable? Can I drink this? And she goes, yeah, wait about a half an hour, the mud will settle, then you can drink it. And so I took these dysentery pills first, because I'd had amoebas before, and I waited, and then I drank the water. But anyway. Okay, and I wanted to point out 2 things. This piece here is revered by the family. And many of the family members of the Borondas come from as far away as Costa Rica to literally pay reverence to this figure. And it was donated by Helen Hidalgo, a descendant of the Borondas. This chair, we believe, is probably dated from the mission era, probably the late 1700s.
Wow.
And so you get a sense of the kinds of furnishings that were handmade in the missions by the indigenous peoples.
What is that, what makes up the webbing of it? What is that?
It's just a piece of leather. Okay. Yeah, it's a piece of leather. It's been nailed into the wooden piece, and then it's been all pegged together. So.
What's this thing? Is this like a air purifier or dehumidifier?
Yeah, we do our best to try to maintain, that's part of our huge electric bill, but, being able to keep the buildings stable as far as temperature and humidity.
Oh, okay.
And we do have the gauges for determining the level of the humidity. And it does vary, so. Just go into the Victorian Library. Robert Bailey is
tour over there of the Adobe by Reuben.
And then you know everything, probably more than I know about it at this point.
I'm Eloise Shim, by the way. Are you,
Robert Bailey. Now, is this the first time you've been here?
Yes.
Well, come on in. This is our future museum. It's basically a warehouse right now,
Uh-huh.
just holding a bunch of our
Look at this
stuff.
piano.
Yes.
What's the story with that?
Made in Paris, France. It was at the Paris exhibition, 1874,
Wow.
and there was a local person, last name Green,
Uh-huh.
there, and he liked it, bought it, had it shipped to PG. And if you're familiar with the Green Mansion there in New Monterey on Lighthouse, it used to be Consuelo's restaurant. It's been different things. I think it's back to being a private residence now.
Oh.
Anyway, so he had it shipped to the house, and in 1991, James got a phone call. We've got this piano here. If you want it, fine. If not, it's going to the dump. So we brought it here. That was the last original piece of furniture in the house.
Wow. Does it work?
It's probably out of tune. It's never been restored, so it's original condition, but it's obviously out of tune
Yeah.
at this point. But yeah, it works. The keys,
works.
bang it
Yeah.
and all. One of about 6
beautiful.
pianos. Oh, it is.
All
It
carved.
really catches
Yeah.
people's eye.
It is nice.
So, well,
Okay. And this, what is this?
well, I'll tell you when you get in here.
Okay.
This is our future library study room.
Nice.
A year ago, this was just a dark corner, no windows or anything. The plan was always to make this into a library, this corner. We received our funding from 2 generous benefactors, and so this project has been fully funded. And so we had a local contractor basically get it to this point, and now our volunteers are going to finish it. The theme is going to be about 1880s. Working off our architectural pieces here that came out of a mansion in Salinas that was torn down in 1965. It was the Carl Williams house. It was behind the courthouse. There are Alisal's, one of 5 fireplace mantel and surrounds that came out of the house. Luckily, the people that were here, part of this organization in those years, were let into the house, the mansion. They were able to strip some of the items out. 5 fireplace pieces, these beautiful doors. If you look at what looks like wood grain, that's actually painted.
Oh,
It's painted wood grain. That's what I guess they did in those days.
oh. What kind of wood is it? Do you know? Is it oak or
Walnut.
walnut?
So we've got wallpaper. That's reproduction wallpaper. It'll be 4 different
Oh, beautiful.
including the ceiling.
Nice.
This would be the ceiling.
Uh-huh.
Everything above the tape will be wallpaper. Everything below is going to be our bookcases, which
Okay.
which already
Yeah. Oh, it's pretty wallpaper. Gold and green.
Our period correct chandelier, which originally would have been kerosene, but was converted to electric at some point. Found that at an estate sale. We'll come over here, and this other piece of stained glass goes with this. So it's 216 Main Street in Salinas.
Oh.
It's now a sushi bar, but back 100 plus years ago, it was the Grand Saloon. That's what it says on those doors. Those are the entry doors.
Oh.
I had this rebuilt. A fellow in Carmel Valley rebuilt this for us, and we fitted the window for the glass.
Yeah. So
Banisters.
how old is the stained glass now?
It would be 1900 or so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's nice. Nice
Oh,
colors.
it's beautiful. When the sun comes through in the morning, oh, it's spectacular.
Beautiful colors.
Oh, absolutely.
Purple and blue.
It was in pretty good shape too. It didn't take a
Yeah.
lot of work. There was a few tiny pieces of glass that were missing and easily replaceable. Well, it's like the glass on this fireplace piece. That's original glass, like 1880s. And the miraculous thing is that thing bounced around before. We didn't move in here. The property was donated to us in 1975.
Right.
We didn't build this building until the 90s and didn't finish it until 10 years later. So this thing bounced around between people's garages and
It's all beveled.
beveled. So that's,
Wow.
again, it's miraculous the glass
Yeah, but
made.
it never broke.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
So This is William Shakespeare. Again, this is a period correct item. We got it out of Toronto, Canada, because originally there would have been a globe here, but there was no globe.
Yeah.
So we did have to replace the piece. So if you're going to go big, why not? Go over the top. But for a library, how fitting is that?
Wow.
Yeah.
That is great. Yeah, I have some Shakespearean training, so that's really cool.
So where we're at now is just all these pieces have to be fit in place, cut down, some fabrication. So our one volunteer, Tom Spencer, who is very familiar with this type of construction, is working on this as he can. He's actually having to, again, fabricate some things so everything's slowed down. But
And it would be fit for gas? Or is it-
originally it would have been gas.
So they put the gas through the
I guess so.
canister?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, if Tom was here, he'd be able to explain it to you, but much like the chandelier over there, that would have been kerosene, that was converted. So, again, this is the same time period. Library, we'll have a large conference type of table for putting books and doing research, and we've got plenty of books to fill all the bookcases, because the bookcases are going to go all the way around here, including upstairs. But we're just focusing on this now. Upstairs is going to be later. But yeah, it's going to be a place to do research, read, and just enjoy the ambiance. We've got wood flooring, and that's already on order. It'll be here in a matter of weeks. And
We can't go up, it's not done yet.
there's nothing really up there
Yeah.
at this point. It's a boardroom room, really.
That's neat to have like a reading room of all those old books.
Well, not only that is what I'm into, and I've been volunteering for over 10 years now, is we have all these beautiful little architectural pieces and pieces of art and everything, and it's just shoved in a dark corner. I'd like everybody to be able to enjoy it and see this,
Yeah.
especially people that have been in Salinas for generations. In my case, my family goes back to the 1700s here, and and people that remember
Yeah.
the old mansion. One of our major contributors to the project was descendants of the Williams family that owned the house.
Oh, wow.
So that's how they got interested in the project, because this is their family.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah. Like, so Williams Road, so that family.
When Matt Williams was the fellow's name, he lived out there originally and farmed. There used to be a beautiful mansion out there.
Oh. What happened to it?
It became dilapidated, and they eventually just tore it down. But then he brought the family in and bought the car house. This house here, brought the family in from the outskirts. And so and what we have here is actually another project of ours. It's going to be down the road, so it's going to be expensive, but this would be the future First Peoples Museum.
This is interesting.
That's reproduction. Those would have been obviously the original switches,
Right.
but those are actually new reproduction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where did these clay pieces come from?
Those came out of Pacific Grove.
Is it a shop? Or?
These over here, I think it was a pharmacy. And the pharmacy changed hands, and we were given a call if we'd like them. Sure, and they hauled them over to us.
So it's like two giant pieces.
Yes.
And then this one, is that?
That one there, I don't know if it came out of the same store. It might have. Have you been to our office yet?
No.
James is in there. He's actually our executive director. He's got answers for everything. I'm not sure. We've got more cases down there. But I'm pretty sure it came out of the same spot, but I'm not 100% sure.
Wow.
But
What's this thing?
this is the first female physician in Monterey County, Emma Herson. This was her buggy she would do the house calls in.
Wow.
Yes.
So when did they build this? What
It was
time frame is this?
Well, it would have been 1890s.
Wow.
Yeah.
It still has
Is those
the top.
milk bottles?
Milk bottles. Go ahead and go around there, yeah.
Oh. has the original upholstery and everything.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, I mean, the wheels, the most important are the wheels.
Oh, they're
Because
metal.
they're
Wow.
difficult to, well, just the tread.
Mm-hmm.
Because to replicate these, you've got to find somebody that knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a little easier to do the fabric work. But
And then, of course, you'd hook it up to the horse.
the horse, sure.
A
A lot of typewriters, we've got license plates, we've got milk bottles, beer bottles. There were
Cigar
cigar shop.
boxes,
Well, they made
yeah.
there were cigar makers in Salinas at one
wow.
time. As you look, El Salinas.
Oh, what is this, like distillery holders or something?
These were Doc Ricketts. These were sanitizers for instruments.
And this
I'm
is
you're
the-
listening.
because I'm rereading the
Oh,
Steinbeck.
okay. Okay, yeah.
And
he-
I know that Ricketts was his friend.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
buddies.
So I'm thinking right in that area, the 30s or 40s.
Could be. James would know. Yeah, a lot of little interesting things. We've got the little shoes for oxen that dragged pioneers across the plains over there in the Carmel Valley residences and all. So,
These license plates are from, do they have the dates on them or what?
yeah, going back to what, 1914 or so?
Wow.
But yeah, it's just this is what I love. I pretty much found a box a few years ago and it's full of license plates. So I mounted them in that
That's cool.
what was a shelf at one time. A lot of this stuff I've pulled out of boxes just because again I like everybody to see what's going on,
Yeah.
what we've got, and all.
Who painted this one here, this painting? Is it?
That's Spreckles.
Oh,
And there's a whole series of them. Let me see. There's a fella here that would be able to. I think he's still here. Ken Dursa is his name. He is Mr. Spreckles for today, and he actually knows these things. It was a project, I think, from Monterey County. They spent like $40,000 years ago.
oh.
And like you said, there's like 10, 12 of these.
Oh,
And
so they're not modern. They've been painted, what?
right. Spreckles used to have a show once a year talking about the history of Spreckles. And we just held these for them, and they would pick these up and take them into Spreckles to the
Oh, okay.
Veteran Center, or whatever that place is over there, and have a weekend of sharing the history of Spreckles, and then they bring everything
Oh,
back.
I see.
They haven't done it in years, and we thought, well, they're beautiful.
Yeah,
We put them out for display.
yeah. They look like that. I can't think of the name of the artist, but there's some artist that does a style like that that's really famous.
Yes.
And then these pictures, they're original here? It looks like from the
Yes, they're
Victorian
local.
age?
They're local. I imagine
Like with
you
a
know.
pony and a
Yeah.
pony drawn?
I'm sure you heard. We have the Hathaway collection. Pat Hathaway, who is a lifelong collector of local photography and ephemera. Anyway, that's a little bit of what he had.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
I went through the first mayor's house.
Okay.
Over by the,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
yeah. And I saw some of their artifacts there.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I know that was late 1800s.
Because I think their main guy's over here too. Larry.
Yeah, I
Yes, he
saw
was.
him. I saw.
Oh, okay.
I saw that guy.
Okay.
Because I saw him over there too.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in a nutshell, that's what we're all about. Those are the bookcases with the tarp on it. Those are all the bookcases that are coming here.
So how do you envision this whole space? I mean, is it going to be like a museum?
It's
or-
yes, exactly. We'll have little display cases where we've got furniture from the old Caminos Hotel, so we have a little section off area where we could have a replica of a room. What it would look like in the
Yeah.
Caminos. We do want to cut it in half. Essentially, we'd like to partition this off, put walls up, to have like an entry area into here with walls to hang art, to have a little art, be able to display art, utilize our display cases that we've got on this end maybe have different types of displays that change up every once in a while
Yeah.
with little things like this.
Huh.
But it takes, number one, money, and which wouldn't cost that much for lumber or whatever, but it's time.
Yeah.
Our volunteers would have to do it. And
Oh.
he's busy on the library, he's busy on the Weeks House.
Yeah.
So really it's almost as difficult getting volunteers as it is money,
Yeah.
you know?